My name is Tess. I am a senior producer at Connecticut Public. My earliest memory of the public library system in my town in New Hampshire where I grew up was probably going to the third floor archives. With my mom, we were trying to find information about the home we lived in. We lived in a historic home growing up. And at the time, I was just getting into reading. I was in second grade, and my teacher told me I was ready to read chapter books. And so we were really getting into the children's section of the library. And I got into Nancy Drew books, which are all about mystery and finding pieces of paper and solving things. And so when I went into the archives, it felt like I was in the middle of a mystery novel trying to find answers for something important. And so it's that memory, and it's also the kind of smell memory of books that I think a lot of us have associated with libraries and places that house books that just comes back to you whenever you're there. When I was a teenager and into college, to be honest with you, I actually stepped away from the library for a bit. It wasn't the place that I went as much. I definitely spent some time in college using those rooms to study in, but I don't think it was until I was in my mid-20s that I returned to the library, and I was thinking about this today. I was, like a lot of us that experience the mid-20s, there's a little bit of an age of depression and identity crisis and anxiety. And when I was going through that in my early adulthood, I started thinking about what were those times in my life that I was most joyful and most happy. And I started to think back to an age where I was 11 years old, and I was trying to think about what was going on at 11 years old. And I remember that at 11 years old in sixth grade, I read 50 books that year. I was a really avid reader at that age, and something clicked with me then. And so in that age of young adulthood, in mid-20s, I started returning to the library and started re-engaging in reading. And I started remembering that when I was a child, people have a lot of different happy places. Some of them, as a child, could be in the classroom. Some of it could be on the ball field. And I think my oasis was kind of among the library. And so when I was kind of navigating that point in my life in my 20s where I was feeling very lost and uncertain, I found myself back at the library, in a completely different town, a different place, but very much felt at home and gave me the same sense of peace that I had when I was very young. It was just coming home again. Is there any connection between the library and what I do as a producer, as a journalist? I think all of us in journalism probably will say absolutely to that question, and I think I'm no exception. Although so much of our job is very social and very interactive, a lot of us require time for incredibly deep work and deep thought and deep thinking, and a lot of research, a lot of history, a lot of deep dives into the subject matter that we cover. And I think the library, for myself, is the first place you learn to be curious and learn to kind of follow the breadcrumbs, as we call it in journalism, where you pick up one book that leads to another book. You learn about one subject matter that leads to another subject matter. And the library is kind of where you first get bitten by the bug, I think, of curiosity in journalism and learning reporting, because a lot of what we learn in the library, a lot of what I learned in the library is how to draw kind of a map and kind of go from one subject to the next and find sources and do that very important work, learning about citing your sources and all those important things. It kind of all connects to the library. A piece of advice that I have received, I had a spiritual advisor tell me recently that as I navigate my life and I'm in an age of seeking to look for peace and look for joy and look for what feels right. And she coined that as joy and peace is where God is. And that is kind of reflective in my own work as a producer, because there's a feeling I get sometimes working on this story that I can't quite articulate, but I know when something is right. I know when something's going to resonate with somebody. I know when something feels joyous. And so I really lean into those moments in my life. What advice would I give to someone who wants to be a producer or perhaps a journalist or something in between, because there's so many titles in this profession and so many different career paths you can pursue? I think the advice that I come back to and that I am consistently relearning and leaning into is this career path, working as a journalist, working as a producer, is about the marathon and not the sprint. I once heard Anna Wintour, she's the editor-in-chief for Vogue, say that if you were an overnight sensation, you could be yesterday's news in no time. And I think a lot about that in this day and age where social media can elevate people very, very quickly. And there's not the same understanding and education around career growth. I so admire people in this profession with 20-year careers, and when I was starting to get into journalism, I started studying the career tracks of people that I admired and realizing you don't get it all at once. There's not that one magic story and that you're on the map and now you're a journalist. It's really about taking the time and trusting the process that you will come into yourself as a journalist over time. There's no magic bullet to do this, and that's totally okay. I think so many of us, myself included, are looking for that quick fix, that feeling of I made it really quickly. I've been here at Connecticut Public for about 5 years now, and I've been in this industry of journalism and media since 2014, so I've been here for 10 years, and this is the first year where I actually kind of feel like I've done something with my career and have kind of walked away from the imposter syndrome that I've carried with me for a long time, and that's a wonderful thing. It takes a long time to build a castle. It takes a long time to build a kingdom, and that's so okay. You've got time. Dreams don't have deadlines. I love that line. In what ways can a young person use the library? And I'm not going to limit this to journalism. I think this is anything. Before I worked at NPR, I think this was the year before I was offered the job, I read the biography of Katharine Graham. Katharine Graham was the editor-in-chief at the Washington Post. I love reading biographies of people whose careers I admire and who have had enormous success in the profession that I am. And I think it doesn't have to be limited to journalism. Any career, any field that you admire, any field that you see yourself in, there are a wealth of stories and a wealth of storytellers that have written on page how they got there, and studying their track and seeing how they made their way to sometimes the top of their fields is a really valuable thing to do. And I think I picked up that book of Katharine Graham at the library. I think that was something I had to request from the library, actually. And there's just such a wealth of biographies like that at the library. You get to study the lives of people you admire and try to duplicate it the best you can in your own way. And I don't think I'll ever be the editor-in-chief of Washington Post, but I'm pretty happy where I am because I was able to learn a little bit from her and others that I admire. Even the biography that Michelle Obama put out a few years ago, I remember learning so much of that and of her character and wanting to model my character off of that. And so many of those resources can be picked up on the library. What do I think the library has to do with self-preservation? What a wonderful question in the day of social media, where we're doing so much of our own self-preservation. But that's a little bit different. I mean, what we see on Instagram and TikTok is our own efforts of self-preservation. And the library is different entirely because the library has everyone's hands in our own self-preservation or the self-preservation of people around us. So it's a little bit more objective in the way. I've always heard that biographies are more realistic or more reliable than autobiographies, which I entirely agree. And there's a theologian that I admire so much. His name is Henry Nouwen, and he studied at Yale in the Yale Divinity School for many years, and I've been dying to go see his notes and his early works that are preserved within the Yale Library. his handwritten notes and bibliographies and sources he used just to see how the man worked. And how amazing is that some of our favorite, most admired people, a lot of their works, a lot of their first drafts are in the libraries. A library that has served its community for over 250 years. That is quite a remarkable thing. I can't quite wrap my head around that, because that means that Hartford Public Libraries have been around longer than my grandparents, my great-grandparents, my great-great-great-grandparents. I mean, that is going further back. But I guess when I think about 250 years back, I think about 250 years ahead and what that means, and that, God willing, the same resources and so much of the archives are going to be available for future generations, as the old archives are available for our generation to look in and get our hands dirty with. I think I'm almost a little overwhelmed that there is so much there and so much to explore, and there's a little bit of panic that we navigate in journalism, that no matter how much we work in this field, and no matter how much coverage we do, we'll never do it all at the end of the day. And I feel that a lot at libraries, that even if I were spending 9 a.m. when the library opens to 5 p.m. when the library closes every single day, I could never encompass all the library has to offer. And that's okay, because together, all of us coming back to the library, maybe we all collectively will someday, but maybe not. I love libraries because they continue to be a source of oasis and curiosity for me. I try to go to the library without a rigid agenda, if you will. I have a couple books on my list that I am probably searching for, but I really love all the resources and all the things in the library that I stumble upon. I just went to my local library in West Hartford the other day, and I ended up picking up a book that I would have never found in a bookstore because it's not a current book. And I just finished it last night. It was a short book, and it was exactly what I needed to read this week. I've been kind of navigating some stuff in my head this week, and it was exactly what I need to read. I really believe in this kind of destiny that books find you in the library at exactly the right time, because the library contains not just today's bestsellers, but yesterday's, and also everything in between, those forgotten works. Really, the sky's the limit. You just get something in the library, and there's a reverence for it that you don't get elsewhere, because it holds not everything, but close to it. Have I learned more of my successes or failures? That's a good question, and I think I'm trying to answer that question right now in my life. I'm in a period where I am feeling exceedingly grateful and in quite awe of how my life has taken shape. Along with a colleague this year, together we won an Edward R. Murrow Award. It was a huge thing. I didn't even realize we were nominated for it. And yet these past 5 years have been tremendously difficult throughout the pandemic, journalists, like a lot of people, we really struggled during the pandemic. I moved up here to Connecticut in January 2020. The world shut down about 2 months later. So it was an incredibly isolating, difficult couple of years for me. And in 2022, things started to kind of turn around, and I started coming out of the depression and the isolation that the pandemic forced us all into. But I look back at that time in my life, a time in all of our lives, with much kinder eyes. And I don't know if they made me better or stronger, but I kind of zoom out and see the mosaic now, and I don't think I'd have it any other way. What do libraries have to do with dreams, goals, and ambitions? I think the libraries are filled with possibilities and often stories that you will never learn about in your own community. I grew up in a very small rural town in New Hampshire. I think we had one family of color. The population was about 10,000. It was away from lots of cities and lots of possibilities. And it wasn't until I started reading about lives different than mine that I was able to envision a different life for myself and be able to kind of shape my dreams and my goals for myself. And you never know what's going to kind of catch your eye at the library. And sometimes we catch our dreams and other times our dreams catch us. You know, you can learn a lot today on Netflix and Hulu and the news and all these, just a wealth of television content you can peruse. But there's something different about learning about another life in a book and being able to feel that and want to be like, that's what I want. There's just a different learning process that happens through reading than it does through watching. Libraries did give me an access and gave me a buffet of options I could do with my life, other than what was presented to me. What do libraries have to do with the future of our children? We live in an age where things are quite contentious at the moment, and I cannot imagine a time where libraries won't be a safe place. I think that's why I still see it as an oasis, is because when I go there, I feel safe and secure, and I feel comforted by the stacks and by the chairs and by the people around me, all of us kind of in the same mission and in the same kind of peace together. And so I think libraries will continue to, in the future, act as safe spaces for all. And I think they will continue to act as resources for children looking for different types of lives, looking for answers that they cannot find elsewhere. I mean, we have access to so much today. We have access to so much information. And I was born in 92, right as the internet was doing the boom. And it's amazing to think about all the things we can Google today. But in a way, it doesn't really compare to the library. There's no advertisements in a book. What role does respect play? So this is something I'm thinking a lot about, respect in my work in journalism right now, because for the past few weeks I have had the opportunity, privilege, but great responsibility of interviewing people that have suffered tremendous grief and tremendous loss in their lives. And I have been thinking a lot about getting their stories right, getting the story as accurate as I can tell, but also preserving the dignity of the people that have trusted me with their stories and with their experiences. And that involves, for me, a lot of respect, reverence, and holding space for them to come chat with me, come talk with me in those moments of absolute brokenness. And for me to hold space for them to do that and unpack what they have been through completely so we can make sense of it and tell their story to a larger audience. In journalism, and especially at a company like NPR, we are all about accuracy. We are all about ethics in our journalism, and that will always be so. But I have hugged some of my sources before. I have cried with some of my sources before. And I have shared some of my life with my sources. And I have treated their stories sometimes with the most delicate hands, because I see myself not as only responsible to tell a story accurately, but I also feel a certain responsibility to care for my sources. And as I am walking them into darkness and asking them to retell some of the most challenging times of their lives, understanding what I'm asking them to do, and if I'm going to walk them into that space of remembrance and grief and trauma, I need to walk them back out and make sure they're okay. How long have I wanted to be a journalist? I'm not going to say always, because I didn't always. When I graduated high school, I was very convinced I wanted to work in the film industry, and I wanted to move to Los Angeles or New York to do that. But I very quickly learned, not that I didn't have what it takes, but I didn't have the stomach for that. I think working in Los Angeles and New York and working in parts of those industries are a little bit soul-crushing, but I still believed in the power that media had. I worked in podcasts for a long time, but podcasts are a little bit different than journalism, and I made the decision that I wanted to make the switch to working for a journalist company that had the ethics and had the values that I admired, and I was able to do that and came in not knowing too much, but it's through the work of my mentors and them passing on their experience to me that I've been able to kind of navigate my way through. I mean, a lot of journalism is, like I said before, it's not a career that you go into and you're there. You can say, I'm a journalist, or at least it wasn't for me. It's really a slow grind process of one story after another. It's a craft, it's a practice. Do I believe my stories tell themselves, or is it an interpretation? I think a lot about that, actually, because we talk about ethics in journalism. I do not see it as my job to embellish my stories. I feel an enormous responsibility to tell the whole story and keep it complex. We live in a time where our stories, our politics, our lives, our opinions have become quite black and white. And when I describe the type of journalism I like to do, I describe it as I like to live in the gray area. I don't really want people to walk away from one of my pieces really having received directives. I just want them to walk away feeling thoughtful. What would I like my legacy to be as it relates to libraries? I do a lot of writing because that's part of my profession in journalism, but I have kept my journals, my handwritten journals from 2013 to now, and that is a bookshelf of journals. And sometimes I think about, like, what is someone going to think when they stumble upon this 60 years, 50 years from now? Is this going to be preserved in the library? But I try not to get into that ego trap too much. Possibly my own work will end up at a library, and that will be my legacy. But one of my favorite tasks in this job is mentorship, being a teacher and passing on the craft of journalism and kindness and respect for the work is something I'm really passionate about, because I'm very aware that all of us will eventually be forgotten, and what we leave behind is what we pass on to others. I am just a little tiny blip in the news radar. My work is just a tiny piece of what is reported on every day, but I like to think that maybe that little tiny blip might bleed into somebody else. It will bleed into somebody else, and it'll bleed into somebody else, whether that's inspiration on how we create the work, how we conduct ourselves as journalists, or just our kindness and what we pass on to others. And so maybe that will be my legacy.
Thank you for listening to 250 Stories, a production of HPL Studios at Hartford Public Library. This episode was written and produced by Christopher T. Brown, sound by Sam Sigmund, edited by Faith Lucas, produced by Lucy Nalpathanchel, and with photography and graphic design support from Hartford Public Library's communications team and the Hartford History Center. For more information on this project, visit www.hplstudios.hplct.org. New episodes release every Tuesday, so subscribe to stay tuned.